Hello and welcome to Politics Today, and in this week's programme we shall be discussing the extraordinary events that have been occurring in the Middle East. Seeing that all the Israeli hostages have come home to their loved ones, seeing that the war in Gaza has ended, but this has brought calamity upon the Islamists and also on the hard left, who can no longer use Gaza as a radical cause in which to unite their evil agenda behind. So in this programme today, I'm joined by Joshua Bellingham, who's a political analyst, together with Carl Willers from Christian Concern. So guys, thank you so much for being on the programme, and it's great to see that God is raising up young Christian leaders like yourself in your generation, so well done. I'll start off with you, Joshua. It's great to have you back on the programme. Now, I know last week that you were in Manchester attending the Conservative Party conference. Share with us your thoughts and your reflections on the party conference.
Thank you so much, Simon, for having me back on the show. It's always a delight. Yeah, you're right. I was up in Manchester, and it was very interesting, especially in the aftermath of what has just happened recently with the attacks on the Jewish synagogue there. There was a lot of conversation around that, as you would expect. But my main takeaway from the time was actually an unexpected one. I had a lot of engagement with young people who hadn't been to the conference before, and quite a number of people who said that they were there because of Charlie Kirk, and he had been a really important factor in them getting involved in the political scene. So by and large, incredibly encouraged by the conversations with the Christians getting involved in conservative politics. So that was my main takeaway, really. It's
a good takeaway. And Carl, great to have you back on Politics Today, and thank you for the work that you do and all of you guys do at Christian Concern in defending our Christian freedoms. But you've also ended up running an event for Turning Point UK, which was headed up by the famous Charlie Kirk, and what a legacy he's left behind. But share with us and give us an update on the vital work that you are doing through Christian Concern.
Yeah, of course. Thank you again, Simon, for having me on. And yeah, so Christian Concern are still cracking on with our legal cases. So the Darlington nurses are going to be facing a legal case because the NHS are seeking to basically penalise them because they didn't want to get change with a trans man. So we're seeking to really go out there and support the Darlington nurses. And what's great about this case, which is basically, if people are watching aren't aware, it's nurses who didn't want to get change with a trans man, someone who just identified as a woman but was actually a man. And because of that, these nurses are being persecuted for that. So this really highlights the insanity in the NHS, and really we're fighting legally to support them. So recently that's been a big thing as well. We've also Tim Dieppe has been doing lots of great discussions and debates around the subject of Islam and getting the church engaged with Islam. So there's been many great things happening.
Excellent. And Joshua, give us your perspective on what has been a truly historical week in the Middle East. We've seen that the 20 living Israeli hostages have returned home to their loved ones after 2 years of being held in horrific and vile conditions by Hamas. And of course also means that the war in Gaza that has been so contentious is now finally over, and it looks like Hamas are going to be removed and that Gaza could possibly have a new future. But give us your thoughts as well with the speech made by President Trump when he addressed the Israeli Knesset so powerfully, and how his presidency, even though it's less than a year since he won the US elections, has done more in this 1 year than Biden did in his whole 4 years as US president.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an incredible moment that we're witnessing. So many people didn't think this was possible. So many people have said throughout the years with Trump that it would never be able to happen, and that he wouldn't be able to do something like this. It's an incredibly joyous moment. On Saturday, I was watching, they had a live stream on YouTube of Gazans returning into the land, and then you see the celebrations in Israel, an incredibly joyous time. And then Trump's speech in Israel was a real marker point in the history of the land, And I think what he said, that it was the dawn of a new era in the Middle East. It's a fragile hope. Of course, everyone knows that these things easily break down. But what we've seen with the return of the hostages and some really tangible steps forward in uniting the Arab states and the surrounding nations in getting behind this peace deal is an incredibly encouraging thing. And I think a great testament to Trump's leadership and the legacy of the Abraham Accords, which he was able to spearhead in his previous administration, which I think laid the ground for a lot of this building of cooperative relations.
Absolutely, and he did honour the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob in his speech, historical speech in the Knesset, only the fourth US president ever to address the Israeli parliament. Give us your perspective, Carl, on this massive wave of online radicalisation, whether it's the Islamist agenda, whether it's Gaza, whether it's this anti-Western ideology that is infecting so many young people and poisoning their brains, or essentially what we're seeing as well, all this anti-Christian woke ideology that's permeating through social media, whether it's from the Islamists or whether it's from the hard left.
You know, of course, well, I really think this issue actually starts in the education system. You know, in British education systems, we're taught a certain narrative about the history of the West. And that narrative being that Western civilization has not been a good force in the world. We're taught that we've got everything that we have by killing, stealing, and destroying. And not only that, but the education system is riddled with something called critical theory. And this is the Marxist idea that basically there is an oppressor and the oppressed. And so we need to look at all of life through this paradigm of oppressor and oppressed. So it's our job to help the oppressed and make sure that the oppressor is held to justice. So we're deemed in the West as the oppressors. And this is why young people my age that haven't looked into this, think that Western civilization is corrupt. So we get taught this foundation as human beings in Britain. And therefore, when we go online and we see these stories about, you know, Gaza, and we're seeing these supposedly suppressed people by Israel, we immediately latch on to their cause and we want to fight for them. Or in the gender ideology space, we see these people that are gay or trans, we see them as oppressed. And therefore, in order to be a good human being, we need to be on their side. So these people are really latching onto these extreme ideologies because of the foundational worldview that they've been indoctrinated in their education system. And the fact is these people are becoming more and more extreme in their radicalization in these issues. And we can see that throughout all the marches going on. We can see that through the more extreme forms of this gender ideology coming out.
Absolutely.
But,
yeah, thank you. That's an excellent explanation, Carl. Joshua, I suppose we have to ask as well, you know, we've got to understand really what's happened over the past 2 years. Ever since Israel was invaded by Hamas on October the 7th. And finally, these 2 years are finally over, the war in Gaza is over. But this war essentially has been used to demonize Israel, demonize the Jewish people as a means to try and Islamize Europe. And we've seen that to large effects because we've seen so many radical Islamists using the cause of Gaza for political influence. We've seen that the Islamists have hijacked the Green Party. We've seen that they've hijacked the Labour Party, and essentially now with the Labour Party and this Labour government, we effectively see that red-green alliance of the hard left aligned with the Islamists to bring down and destroy so much of our Judeo-Christian heritages. But share with us your thoughts on how the emergence of President Trump, this projection of US power onto the world stage, has not only given conservative Christians hope in America, but also in the West. And now we're seeing the fruits of this come and bear in the Middle East with the prospect of peace between Israel and Gaza because of US mediation.
Absolutely. I think the big lesson to the West and to Europe and to Britain from America is that things can get done when people have been saying that it can't be done. That there are these walls, there are these conflicts, there's these problems that we're facing around the world that are causing instability. and they seem untouchable. They seem completely out of the scope of power and influence and Western values. What we see with Trump, what he's done, he's taken it and he's brought the whole force of his administration, his persuasive power, he's put his shoulder into the wheel of getting deals done, and has been relentless in that. And it shows that the determination, the will to do something about it is fundamental. It's the courage to actually step into the ring and say, okay, we're not going to leave until we have a satisfactory deal. I think that's an incredible encouragement to the West overall, and we see that, I think, that having a positive impact in Europe and also in the UK. I think with the political changes that are going on in the things that people are aware of now, that's going. I hope that starts to inform what we expect of our own leaders, that there is actually a Britain which can return to its roots and understand its position in the world, that's not a position of weakness but a position of influence. And there's actually not only there's not just power there and possibility to influence, there's also a moral responsibility. There's also the responsibility to actually act meaningfully in the world and to affect the future of millions of people, as in the case of what's happened recently with Gaza and Israel.
Absolutely, and I think to add to that, what we're seeing from the US President and the US administration is moral clarity, something that has been lacking for decades from our Western leaders, with a clear sense of what's right and what's wrong, and then acting upon that. And Carl, how do you see movements like the hard left, whether it's the Greens, the Islamist allies, those of the hard left as well, using such emotive causes such as Gaza and using them as a kind of political tools to push their political influence, which is very anti-British, very anti-Western, as well as their approach, and very sympathetic to the kind of Islamist agenda?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and ultimately I think they're playing into a theme that we see in Western culture at the moment, and that is people's fear of being seen as a bad person. People now fear being seen as a bad person more than they fear being a bad person. So let's take the Green Party, for example. We have this narrative that the world is coming to an end because of climate change. And basically the burden's on us. It's all our fault. We're the ones that have been perpetrating this crime against nature. And therefore, as it's our fault, we feel this guilt. And in order to absolve ourselves of this guilt, in order to not to be perceived as a bad person, we want to show other people that we're going to vote for the Green Party. We're going to get them on board. It's the same with Islam. Islam say that even though they're in a Western country, they say that if you critique Islam, you get deemed as Islamophobic. So the guilt is once again on the British people in this area. And in order to abscond ourselves of the guilt, we have to we don't want to have Islamophobia. So we're capitulated in these areas, and the reason we are, and that the reason these emotive techniques work, is because we don't want to be perceived as a bad person. So the Gaza incident is the same. People don't want to be perceived as a bad person. So when everyone is talking about this big issue, this big injustice, people, in order to save face, they're going to say, I'm going to support this politician who is against Gaza. I'm going to go, who is against Israel. I'm going to go out and I'm going to protest just to show that I'm a good person. So I think underneath there, that's really this sort of fear of man and people-pleasing going on that's allowing this to happen.
And also extreme virtual signalling.
Of course, yeah. I think that's really what it boils down to as well.
And Josh, Paul Goodman wrote an excellent article in the Daily Telegraph under this headline: Trump's deal is certainly for Britain's Islamists. The wider Abraham Accords offer a prospect of a stable, peaceful Middle East. Then the West grievance mongers will have nowhere to turn. So he writes, please comment on what Paul has written on law. Let me write this as well. He said that ignited by the Hamas atrocities on October the 7th, 2023 is terrible, but far from being the world's most bloody conflict, 9 other conflicts have cost more in lives and displacements, more refugees during the last 10 years, including one that gained far less media and social media traction, such as the Sudanese civil war, which has seen 12 million people displaced and the world's biggest hunger crisis. and there's no mass marches for Sudan. So share with us how, for example, we're seeing Sudan. The other example, I think, is Armenia with Nagorno-Karabakh that was invaded on 2 weeks before October the 7th in 2023 by Azerbaijan forces, displacing over 180,000 people. And yet the world's not interested. Our media's not interested, social media are not interested, but because there's huge money being backed by the Islamists, particularly on the cause of Gaza, and this is used as a means to Islamize. So share with us how the war in Gaza has effectively been used as a kind of political weapon in the hands of those who hate Israel and hate the West.
Well, I think you're exactly right. It all becomes so much more clear when we look at what else is happening around the world. And another example, I think, which is definitely important to keep track of, is Nigeria.
Absolutely.
Everything going on there, atrocities that no one can even imagine on the scale that is completely out of this world. We don't see it anywhere else, even in the Middle East. And the fact that these matters aren't getting attention is very illuminating. Sudan as well. The interesting thing about Sudan is that it's also an ethno-religious conflict. It's not that Islam isn't involved. So you can see, I think, from everything that's transpired over the last 2 years, that there's been a concerted effort to roll out a very effective propaganda war from the side of Hamas to weaponize the entire conflict and to pull on the virtue signaling and the moral heartstrings of people, a lot of people who genuinely are compassionate, they genuinely want to do the right thing. But one of the things that's been quite illustrative has been the journalists who've gone out into these protests, into London, to talk with the protesters, hear what they have to say, and very often what we see is that it's skin deep in terms of what people actually understand about geopolitics, what's actually happening. That I actually, at the Conservative Party conference, I heard a really good talk from an 87-year-old Holocaust survivor who survived because of an administrative error, and he was talking about what's going on in Britain. And one of the things he mentioned was that we have a problem where our populace and our culture has become so accustomed to consuming fast food ideas, fast food content, that we don't think about what we're actually receiving and how we're engaging with it. And so, to your point, I think there's a real need to expand the moral discourse and expand what we're talking about, and to put that in the right space, because there's so many other things going on.
Yeah, and share with us, Carl, how these predominant ideologies, particularly in your generation, whether it's Marxism, extreme liberalism, whether it's Islamism in itself, having that huge influence. But again, these are totalitarian ideologies and ideas, because you're not allowed any other idea other than their own. And share with us how that has been forced, particularly on your generation, through social media, where there isn't that free discourse, there isn't that freedom of discussion, there isn't that freedom of saying, well, let's examine your views and let's examine my views and let's kind of meet somewhere in between. It's very much like Charlie Kirk and his whole ministry, and why he was so successful, deployed such a thing to break down these totalitarian ideas and ideology.
Yeah, well, I think realistically, this generation, they see everything in like black and white. They see you're either evil or you're good. And I think part of this comes back to critical theory. You're either an oppressor or you're being oppressed. So anyone who isn't in alignment with the leftist agenda, people who don't see eye to eye on the Gaza situation, people who do not subscribe to their beliefs about gender, people who do not subscribe to their beliefs about the welfare system, whatever it may be, these people are not just deemed as people who disagree, but they're deemed as people who are on the side of the oppressor. These people are considered evil and not good at all. So they're so saturated with this critical theory, and they may not even be conscious that they are saturated with this, because it's been woven into the media, to the education system, but the fact is that they are, and therefore it's preventing them from having these conversations and actually sharing ideas. And not only that, these people as well, they don't believe, this younger generation, they don't believe in objective truth. It's all about my truth. I think this, I feel this. So people who don't think that there is an objective truth, they're not going to be conscious about pursuing that truth and having conversations with people that have different viewpoints to them.
Absolutely, that is so dangerous, isn't it?
Yeah.
This whole concept of no relative truth, and then you can interpret your own truth based on emotion rather than based on facts and rationale. That's an extremely dangerous world to actually enter into when you actually break it down and think it through. Joshua, if you could just unpack what Paul Goodman writes, and this is an incredible paragraph that he writes in his article. He says, it follows that it is a strategic necessity for the Islamists and the left for the war to continue. It needs the death and displacement to claim genocide and famine. It needs the war porn pumped into our social media feeds to keep the streets thuggeries going. It needs pressure on bewildered and frightened Labour MPs to ensure arms sales to Israel are not restricted. Share with us how, for example, the war coming to an end ends their ammunition. It ends the alliance between the red Islamists, so the red liberals and the green Islamists, and they haven't got any fuel for their agenda now. That we're seeing the emergence of possibly peace, certainly a ceasefire working in Gaza, and how they need this war to fume and push their ideologies.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the use of Middle Eastern geopolitics for domestic political agendas does predate, of course, the war that's been going on for the last 2 years. But we saw it accelerated to a whole nother level. I don't think there's no comparison to make in terms of what we've seen in the last 2 years. With regards to his comments, I think it will be very revealing, and even in the wake of everything, just a few days before the peace was announced, we had those attacks in Manchester, and then we had the protests that were celebrating that. All of what we're seeing transpire in this country is revealing the dark undercurrents of what is actually at play. And with peace now achieved, and no fuel on the fire for that, in a sense, we will now see who really wants peace. For the people who really are who really want to actually see a genuine resolution there, then we'll see that pan out. But then we'll see the true colors of those who don't want it. And I think there's a real need in Britain to be decisive. There was actually in 2017, the foreign minister of the UAE made this comment in the Middle East that there will be extremists that come out of Europe because of the lack of decisions being made by Britain, by Germany, by Spain, by France, because we've been following a politically correct line of thought, and that we'll see that.
And that's extremely prophetic, because what we're seeing is these radical Islamists that have been based in the Middle East have been kicked out of the Middle East and have come to Europe, where they're given far more freedoms than they're ever allowed in the Middle East, because the Arab states know full well what the Islamist agenda is, and they want to put it pretty much under control. But it's because our Western nations, and because we turned away from our Judeo-Christian heritage, our world leaders, and particularly those in Europe, don't understand this. The Americans do, and the American administration understand this very, very well. But sadly, hopefully this will be the wake-up call that Europe needs. Carl, as a Christian, how do we respond to these totalitarian ideas and ideologies, whether they're the hard left, Marxist ideology, whether it's Islamists pushing their agenda? How do we push back on all of this?
I think it's a good question, and I think it's going to be a real challenge, to be honest. I think one route that we could take is the Charlie Kirk route. is going to the universities where is the place that a lot of these ideologies are spread. It's through the universities, it's through the curriculums, this anti-Western narrative. So going to these places and talking to students and actually having conversations, and especially when it comes to the modern world, because of the algorithms that we have, people only hear their own viewpoint or the viewpoint that they subscribe to. It's this echo chamber. So we actually need to break that echo chamber by having conversations with people like Charlie Kirk did. And Charlie Kirk was successful in what he did. Not only was he having conversations with people in person, but he was creating content that went online that could have those conversations be seen by millions of people, changing their minds too. So that's one route, is to open public discourse about these issues and to debunk them, because a lot of them are insane, they're illogical. So they're actually quite easy to debunk if you're equipped. But also, we need to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. Right. We need to preach that they're sinners, that they need to repent, and so they can get given a new heart and have new affections towards what is morally righteous and what is good.
Absolutely. And Josh, how as Christians should we be praying into this situation, but also exposing within 30 seconds the evil agenda, whether it's the Marxists or whether it's the Islamists? We need their agenda exposed.
Yes, well, fundamentally, the more the light shines, the more the darkness will be revealed and the shadows will be uncovered. So I think for Christians, that's the key, to be bold, to be confident in the Lord in terms of what He's given us to say, the message of redemption and reconciliation, and to be peacemakers, to be the ones taking the initiative to go out into those places where there's disagreement, whether that's Speaker's Corner, whether that's somewhere else, and that's how we'll see it change.
So Josh and Carl, well done. Both done an excellent job on this week's Politics Today. Thank you so much. And also quite a difficult programme to unpack as well. So well done. And I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. I think we can all rejoice in the fact that the Israeli hostages have come home, and the fact that the war in Gaza looks like it's coming to an end, which is not fueling this hatred that we're seeing being used by the hard left, being used by the Islamists to radicalize our nation. But we know that our only hope for our nation, as the only hope for Gaza, is the power of the gospel going forth. And we need the gospel to go forth in our nation and throughout the world. And so this is something we need to be praying for. So thank you for watching Politics Today.